Who else, if not those closest to us, can we rely on in this world? Yet this same world is filled with deception, cruelty, and evil. Evil that sometimes hides in plain sight, and when it shows its face, it can be deadly. In October of 2012, a young woman named Rebekah Gay, only 24 years old, disappeared in broad daylight. What unfolded during the search for her shocked everyone. The person behind her disappearance wasn't a stranger, but someone Rebekah, her family, and even her community had trusted completely. Halloween is usually meant to be fun. Children in costumes, houses decorated with pumpkins and cobwebs, candy bowls by the door. But in this story, Halloween wasn't about play or laughter. It became the setting for a nightmare. Because this time, the monster wasn't a character in a scary mask. He was a man who pretended to be ordinary, someone people believed was safe. That's always more terrifying than any horror movie. And before we dive into this case, please be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe, like the video, and stay active. It really helps. I'll be grateful to you for that. Now let's begin. Rebekah Gay was born on March 26, 1988, to Thomas and Sally Gay. She grew up in Midland, Michigan, with her 3 siblings. Her father Thomas was a well-respected man in their community, especially known for his love of horses and his expertise in training and managing them. He had even co-founded a charity horse race, created to raise money for children in need of medical care at a local hospital. Thomas was compassionate, not only with people but with animals as well. He believed in hard work, unity, and faith, and he instilled these values in his children through his actions. For Rebekah, her father's influence was strong. She grew up in a small town where the community was close-knit. Neighbors knew each other, kids played freely, and church was part of daily life. Rebekah was remembered as a sweet-natured girl, gentle and caring, qualities she inherited from her parents. But life for the Gay family changed when Thomas was diagnosed with a terminal illness. The family made the painful decision to place him in hospice care, where he could receive round-the-clock medical support. Sally and the children visited as often as possible, trying to lift his spirits during his final days. At the time, Rebekah was still in high school. She had joined the equestrian team, continuing her father's passion for horses, and volunteered at school archery competitions to help raise funds for families struggling financially. Even as a teenager, Rebekah was already showing signs of following in her father's footsteps, choosing kindness and service as guiding principles in her life. In 2007, she graduated from high school and chose to pursue a career in cosmetology. She enrolled in beauty school, dedicating herself to the craft. Around this time, she was in a serious relationship with a young man named Chad Sando. Rebekah completed her studies and began working as a stylist at a salon in Mount Pleasant, a town near where her mother Sally lived. After Thomas was placed in hospice care and eventually passed away, Sally was overwhelmed by loneliness. She had been married to Thomas for many years, and his absence left a void she didn't know how to fill. Her children were beginning their own adult lives, and she was left to face solitude. Unsure how to cope, she turned to online dating. Sally wasn't searching for a husband but rather for companionship. Someone to talk to, someone who would listen, someone to ease the emptiness. Eventually, she moved into a mobile home in the Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. It was there she began corresponding with a man named John Douglas White, who lived in Augusta, Michigan, about a 2-hour drive away. Their conversations developed into a relationship. Soon, they decided to live together. John also found work as a pastor at a nearby church where Sally herself taught Sunday school. The couple bonded over their shared Christian faith, enjoying each other's company and the stability it seemed to offer. Mount Pleasant was a relatively small town, with a population just under 20,000. Sally's new home was about a 20-minute drive from the center of town, surrounded by farmland and countryside. It seemed like a peaceful and quiet environment, the perfect place to raise children or live a simple life. Meanwhile, Rebekah, Sally's youngest daughter, learned she was pregnant. When she gave birth to her son Connor, she and Chad tried their best to provide him with stability. But like many young couples, the responsibilities of parenthood were overwhelming. Rebekah poured all her energy into raising Connor, and as a result, the relationship with Chad fell apart. Rebekah became a single mother, but she embraced the role fully. Her son Connor became the center of her world. She balanced motherhood with her career, determined to provide him with the best life possible. Rebekah's friends and family admired how she never complained, even though juggling her job and motherhood wasn't easy. She lived with gratitude, her sense of purpose growing even deeper after becoming a mother. To be close to her mom, Rebekah rented a mobile home in the same trailer park where Sally and John lived. It was across the street, allowing her to visit often. Rebekah and Connor spent nearly every evening at Sally's home. John cooked meals for them and even helped care for the little boy. He willingly stepped into the role of a father figure for Rebekah and a grandfather figure for Connor. He would drive Connor to daycare or babysit when Rebekah was busy with work. For Rebekah, having her mother and John nearby gave her a strong sense of support and security. At first, Rebekah continued to work in cosmetology, but the long hours became too difficult to manage while raising Connor. She transitioned to a retail job in Mount Pleasant, where the schedule was more manageable. By working hard and building good relationships with her colleagues, Rebekah quickly earned a managerial role. Her personal life was flourishing as well. Rebekah had met Aaron Quinn when Connor was about a year old, and the relationship blossomed. Aaron treated Rebekah with love and respect and accepted Connor as his own. He became deeply involved in their lives, with plans to marry Rebekah soon. Aaron's family welcomed her warmly, and Sally and John also supported her relationship with him. Rebekah cared about John too. Once, when he was sick with a cold, she cooked soup for him, picked up medicine, and even bought pizza to make sure he felt cared for. It was her way of showing gratitude for how much he helped with Connor. Surrounded by people who cared for her, Rebekah was building a modest but happy life filled with love and support. By 2012, Connor was 3 years old, and Halloween was just around the corner. For Rebekah, Halloween had always been her favorite holiday. This year felt special, since Connor was old enough to enjoy it. She bought him a Spider-Man costume, eager to take him trick-or-treating. She also went all out with decorations. Her home was filled with pumpkins, scarecrows, cobwebs, and spooky signs. She was excited for the festivities and shared her joy with her mother and Aaron. It was supposed to be a holiday of laughter and family fun. But for Rebekah, that Halloween never came. On the evening before Halloween, Rebekah was at home with her little boy. The plan for the next morning was simple. Connor would be dropped off to spend the day with his father, Chad, while Rebekah went to work. Later that evening, she would pick him up, dress him in his Spider-Man costume, and take him trick-or-treating for the very first time. She was thrilled about it and told both her mother and Aaron how much she was looking forward to the day. Rebekah had already worked out her schedule so she could take the morning shift at her job. This allowed her to spend more time with Connor in the afternoons. But on October 31st, 2012, something happened that no one could explain. Rebekah didn't show up for work. Her absence immediately alarmed her coworkers. Rebekah was dependable and professional. It wasn't like her to miss a shift without notifying anyone. She also didn't answer her phone, which was unusual. Hoping it was some kind of mix-up, one of her colleagues drove to her trailer to check on her. When he arrived, no one answered the door. The house looked quiet, and though he knocked repeatedly, there was no response. He tried the front door, but it was locked. He left, but as he drove back, something caught his attention. Just a short distance from Rebekah's home, in the parking lot of a local bar, was a light blue Buick. He recognized it immediately. It was Rebekah's car. But why would she leave it there, when she had her own driveway at home? The colleague went inside the bar to ask if Rebekah had been seen. The bartender recalled the car being parked there the night before, but said Rebekah had never come in. That made no sense. Rebekah had been at home with Connor that evening, preparing for Halloween. There was no reason for her to abandon her car outside a bar. The bar staff managed to contact the owner of the trailer park, who offered to unlock Rebekah's door so her colleague could check inside. When he entered, Rebekah was nowhere to be found. What he did notice, however, was her purse left open on the table. That purse was special. It had been a gift from Aaron, and Rebekah never went anywhere without it. Alarmed, her colleague immediately called Sally and John to ask if Rebekah had mentioned anything unusual. When Sally heard her daughter had failed to appear at work, she and John rushed to her home. Neighbors soon gathered outside the trailer, whispering anxiously. By noon, Rebekah's family filed a missing persons report with the sheriff's department. At first, the authorities hesitated. Rebekah was an adult, after all, and sometimes people left without telling anyone. But her family knew instantly, this wasn't like her. She would never leave her son, and she would never abandon her job or disappear without calling Aaron or her mother. Still, the police insisted they would wait until 4:30 p.m., the time Rebekah was scheduled to pick up Connor, to see if she showed up. If she failed, they would treat the case as serious. That decision cost investigators valuable time. Hours that could have been spent searching for Rebekah were wasted as her loved ones waited helplessly. That morning, Connor had been scheduled to meet his father, Chad, in a grocery store parking lot. Because Rebekah now worked morning shifts, she couldn't take him herself. John White stepped in to help. He arrived at Rebekah's trailer around 7 a.m. While she was in the bathroom getting ready, John waited for Connor to wake up, changed him, and delivered him to Chad. He later recalled nothing unusual about the morning. Rebekah seemed fine, and everything appeared normal. But by the time 4:30 arrived, Rebekah still hadn't appeared. That was when authorities finally began to treat the situation with urgency. They obtained a search warrant for her home and her car. Inside the house, they quickly noticed troubling signs. Rebekah's purse was still open on the table, but her phone and keys were missing. There was no evidence of forced entry, meaning either Rebekah left voluntarily or someone she trusted entered the home. On the carpet in the hallway, officers noticed an area that looked freshly cleaned, the fibers fluffed up. Closer inspection revealed dark stains. On the kitchen cabinets, a door handle, and even one wall, they found tiny droplets of blood. The cheerful Halloween decorations around the trailer now clashed with the grim sight of yellow police tape strung across the entrance. Turning to her car, investigators found more suspicious evidence. Rebekah was a petite woman who usually kept her driver's seat pulled forward close to the steering wheel. But now, the seat had been pushed far back, as if someone much taller had driven. The car's location in the bar's lot also raised red flags. At this point, detectives were certain foul play was involved. While children in the neighborhood happily put on costumes and knocked on doors for candy, Rebekah's family lived through a nightmare. Connor's first real Halloween, the one Rebekah had been so excited for, never came. He never got to wear his costume, never got to go door to door. Instead, his mother had vanished. John White, who was present through much of the search, asked one of the church elders to pray for Rebekah's safe return. Sally clung to faith, begging God to protect her daughter. But as the hours passed, dread began to sink in. The investigation turned quickly to those closest to Rebekah. When a woman disappears, authorities often start with her romantic partners. So detectives questioned both Aaron, her current boyfriend, and Chad, her ex and Connor's father. Aaron was deeply distressed. He told police he had last spoken to Rebekah the night before. Around 10:43 p.m., he had texted her good night. She didn't reply, which he assumed meant she had already fallen asleep. The next morning, when she failed to respond to his good morning message, he grew worried. He explained that he had been planning to propose on Halloween night. He had been saving for the ring and waiting for the right moment, because Halloween was Rebekah's favorite holiday. Detectives confirmed Aaron's alibi and cleared him of suspicion. They also spoke with Chad, who insisted he and Rebekah had kept a friendly relationship for Connor's sake. He had no reason to harm her. With both men cleared, attention shifted to someone else. Someone who had been part of Rebekah's daily life, Pastor John White. Detectives now turned their attention to John Douglas White, the man who was not only Sally's fiancé, but also a trusted fatherly figure in Rebekah's life, often helping with Connor. He was also, according to his own account, the last person to see her alive. When investigators interviewed him, John said that on the morning of October 31st, he had come to Rebekah's trailer around 7 a.m. He recalled that the porch light was still on and the front door unlocked. Inside, he could hear the water running in the bathroom, so he knew Rebekah was getting ready for work. He didn't actually see her, only heard her voice from behind the door. She told him that Connor was still asleep and asked if he would wait for the boy to wake up, and to remember to turn off the heat before leaving. John claimed that he then lay down on the couch and dozed off. Later, when Connor woke around 8 a.m., Rebekah was gone, supposedly off to work. John said he changed the boy's clothes and took him to meet Chad in the grocery store parking lot. To him, nothing about the morning felt unusual. At first, his account seemed reasonable. But detectives noticed something strange. John had visible cuts on his nose and hands. They looked suspiciously like defensive wounds. When asked, he explained them away, saying that while doing repairs in his trailer, a shelf had fallen on him, cutting his face. He even offered to show officers the spot in his home where the accident had happened. Detectives, having no immediate proof otherwise, noted his explanation and let him go for the moment. Still, something about John White unsettled them. They continued to ask questions of neighbors, friends, and anyone who had seen him interact with Rebekah. Slowly, details began to surface. Most of the congregation at the small church where he preached adored him. They described Pastor White as a kind, generous man who went out of his way to help people. He was the kind of man who would clean someone's gutters, babysit their children, or help build a deck for a family in need. In fact, that was exactly how Sally had come to trust him so deeply. He was reliable, always available, and seemed genuinely caring. But not everyone saw him through the same lens. Bar staff reported that John would occasionally stop by for drinks, which they found unusual for a pastor. Some of Rebekah's colleagues quietly told investigators that she had mentioned feeling uneasy around him. She said his behavior sometimes made her uncomfortable, and she had even considered moving. Aaron, her boyfriend, admitted he too had noticed oddities. He described John as obsessive toward Rebekah. After she got a permanent hairstyle, John began visiting her daily, complimenting her, sometimes showing up unannounced at her home or even at her job. The way he acted toward her didn't feel fatherly, it felt intrusive. John's own sister recalled that he often called her, speaking excitedly about finally having a real family with Sally, Rebekah, and Connor. But when Rebekah started dating Aaron and spending less time with him and her mother, John grew bitter. He complained that after all he had done for her, Rebekah no longer appreciated him. His sister brushed it off at the time, thinking he was just being dramatic. But now, with Rebekah missing, those complaints felt much darker. Detectives decided they needed a clearer picture of who John White really was. They invited him to take a polygraph test. At first, John hesitated. He knew polygraphs weren't always accurate, and he seemed reluctant to go through with it. It was Sally herself, his fiancée, who persuaded him to agree, urging him to prove once and for all that he had nothing to do with her daughter's disappearance. When John finally consented, a detective personally drove him to the testing site in another city. On the way, the detective made small talk, deliberately keeping the pastor relaxed. As John grew comfortable, he began to talk more freely. That was when he dropped a bombshell. He admitted that he had a criminal past. What John revealed stunned the detective. He confessed that he had once been charged in connection with an attempted murder. He described it as a mistake from his younger years, something long behind him. According to John, he had been wrongly convicted and had since turned his life around. Now, he said, he was a man of God, grateful for the second chance he had been given. But detectives weren't convinced. They began digging into his past, determined to verify his story. What they found horrified them. John Douglas White was no ordinary man with a single mistake in his past. His history was littered with violence, especially against women. He was born on May 20th, 1957, in Augusta, Michigan, where his father was not just the town's police chief, but also the fire chief and even the mayor. Growing up, John had a relatively normal childhood. He was close to his two sisters and lived in what many would consider a respectable household. After high school, he joined the Navy, then settled down, married, and started a family. But beneath that ordinary life lurked something much darker. In 1981, while living in Battle Creek, Michigan, John invited his 17-year-old neighbor, Teresa Etherton, into his basement under the pretense of showing her a model racetrack he had built. Trusting him, she followed. Suddenly, John pulled out a knife and stabbed her from behind under her shoulder blade. Shocked and in pain, Teresa turned to face him, only to see John plunge the knife into her again. She was stabbed 15 times before he tried to strangle her. Miraculously, Teresa survived and escaped. In her testimony, she told authorities that John had said chilling words during the attack, that it wasn't his first time harming women. John was arrested and charged with attempted murder. At his trial, he presented himself as remorseful, saying he was a foolish young man who had made a terrible mistake and promising never to do such a thing again. He was 22 at the time and sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison, with mandatory psychological treatment. But just 2 years later, in 1983, he appealed his conviction. Claiming his lawyer had not represented him properly, he managed to secure a reduced sentence. He was released after serving only 2 years, with just probation and counseling ordered. A vicious crime had been met with astonishing leniency. And John White's urges didn't stop there. By 1994, John was a father of 2 and working as a truck driver before switching to an industrial laundry job. That was when 26-year-old coworker Vicky Sue Wall went missing. She had been having an affair with John, and the two were last seen together in the back of a store parking lot. Witnesses saw them inside his pickup truck. When questioned, John admitted the affair but claimed he had dropped Vicky off safely afterward. However, he also told police he experienced blackouts and couldn't remember everything he had done. Not long after, he left home, got drunk, and made vague suicidal threats. Investigators later found blood stains in his truck. DNA testing at the time wasn't advanced enough to fully analyze them. 6 weeks later, Vicky's decomposed body was discovered in a field. Her shirt and bra were tied around her neck. Though the cause of death couldn't be conclusively determined due to decomposition, it was clear she had been killed. Once again, John was the prime suspect. But with limited evidence, prosecutors struck a deal. John pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 8 to 15 years in prison. Behind bars, John studied the Bible, earned a minister's license, and portrayed himself as a reformed man of faith. By 2007, he was released without probation or ongoing monitoring. That was when he met Sally through online dating and eventually became her partner, and a pastor in Mount Pleasant. The truth was chilling. A man who had nearly killed one woman and murdered another had been given chance after chance. Now, Rebekah Gay was missing, and he had been the last to see her. As detectives pieced together John White's disturbing history, they became convinced he wasn't the harmless pastor his congregation saw every Sunday. Still, they needed concrete proof to link him to Rebekah's disappearance. The polygraph test was their next step. When John finally agreed to take it, results showed clear signs of deception. His answers about seeing Rebekah last, about leaving her home that morning, and about his involvement in her disappearance all raised red flags. Investigators now knew they were dealing with something much darker. With this, they obtained a warrant to search John's truck and trailer. What they found only deepened suspicion. Inside his truck, officers discovered red stains and a broken necklace, later confirmed to be Rebekah's. In the cab, there was a bag filled with zip ties, heavy-duty trash bags, and women's underwear that matched Rebekah's size. In his trailer, police found a rubber mallet with what appeared to be blood on it. Each piece of evidence pointed directly to John White. Detectives confronted him with what they had uncovered, but John denied everything. He insisted Rebekah must have been kidnapped, and that he had no idea what had happened to her. Interrogations stretched late into the night and into the early morning hours of November 1st, 2012. For nearly 12 hours, he resisted, refusing to admit his role. The breakthrough came not from aggression, but from emotion. Investigators knew John cared deeply for Sally, his fiancée. They reminded him of what would happen to Rebekah's body if left undiscovered. The decomposition, the trauma Sally would face in seeing her daughter's remains that way, and the devastating impact on little Connor, who would grow up haunted by his mother's disappearance. They pressed him. If he truly loved Sally, he needed to tell the truth. At first, John asked for a lawyer. Left alone in the interrogation room, he sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, he asked to make one last call to Sally. When she answered, John broke down. He told her she was the love of his life, but that after what he had done, she would never want to speak to him again. He apologized repeatedly, saying nothing could be undone, then abruptly hung up. When detectives returned, John finally confessed. He asked for a deal to ensure he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, isolated from others. Only then did he reveal the horrifying details of what he had done. On the night of October 30th, into the early hours of Halloween, John said he had been drinking heavily, several large beers. While drunk, he browsed disturbing websites, including ones centered on necrophilia. Fueled by these dark fantasies, he went to Rebekah's trailer around 2 a.m. Earlier that day, he had deliberately left the back door unlocked while visiting. Now, in the middle of the night, he walked inside. The noise startled Rebekah. She came out of her bedroom, only to be struck multiple times on the head with a rubber mallet. As she collapsed, she looked up and recognized him. Her last sight was the face of a man she trusted implicitly. Still alive, Rebekah struggled weakly. John then tightened a zip tie around her neck until she stopped breathing. He admitted sitting and watching as she died. Afterward, he dragged her body into the kitchen and undressed her. He claimed he couldn't remember whether he had sexual contact with her corpse. He tried to clean the blood, wiping it up with towels and spray cleaner. Then he turned off her phone, took her car keys, and moved her Buick to the bar parking lot nearby, discarding the keys and phone in a dumpster to throw investigators off track. He stuffed Rebekah's bloody clothing and towels into a construction trash bag along with her body. But as he lifted it into his truck, the bag tore. Her necklace broke off and blood dripped, leaving behind the very evidence that would lead police to him. John drove to a ravine near the trailer park and dumped her remains. He scattered the bloody towels elsewhere within a mile of her home. Then he returned to Rebekah's trailer, lay down on her couch, and slept. When morning came, he woke Connor, dressed him, and delivered him to Chad, pretending nothing was wrong. Based on his confession, officers searched the ravine and found Rebekah Gay's body where John said he had left it. The injuries on her head and neck fully matched his account. In court, John Douglas White was sentenced to a minimum of 56 years and a maximum of 85 years in prison. At 55 years old, the sentence guaranteed he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The judge told him bluntly, "Some people have no place in society. You are one of them." But John never served that sentence fully. Only 4 months later, on August 28, 2013, he was found dead in his prison cell. He had taken his own life, too much of a coward to face the punishment he had earned. Rebekah Gay's tragic death highlighted terrifying failures in the justice system. Failures that had allowed a violent predator to walk free again and again, until finally he destroyed yet another life. If you've stayed with me until now, you are a true fan of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future cases. See you in the next story.